I had let my fire die out, crawled into my tent, and tucked myself into my winter sleeping bag. I was thrilled to have it in my gear because it was now in the upper 30s. It had been waiting in my supply cache in Sedona, Arizona. After a hard day's worth of travel and a very full belly, I was in a deep slumber. Unbeknownst to me, a bull elk had found himself in my camp. At this moment, my would-be assailant bugled like a banshee. An elk call, especially from a bull, is deafening at this range. As I mentioned before, I was sleeping deeply. His call to the wild liked to have made me jump out of my skin. After the fog of war set in, I wanted to take cover and find the enemy's position. Once I came to my senses, I called out to my adversary in a half yell, half grunt, "Hyah!" This had the desired effect of startling him to move on. Yet, instead of going away, the sound of his hooves crashing to the ground as he ran was coming toward me. I fumbled with my sleeping bag zipper, trying to get out of my bag in a hurry. This is the Long Journey Podcast with Jason Jamar, detailing my travels across America as I share thrilling stories from my 16-month backpacking trek from California to Maine and my 8-month kayak voyage from Maine to Texas. Day 43. Date, November 1st, 1999. Sunrise, 6:45 a.m. Sunset, 5:32 p.m. Moon phase, waning crescent. Elevation, 7,600 feet. Location, near Baker Butte Lookout, just east of Payson, Arizona. Not too far from Camp Verde, Arizona, I found Rim Road 300, a dirt forest road that runs along the Mogollon Rim in the Apache Sitgraves National Forest. Rim Road 300 was originally a part of a wagon trail built by General George Crook to move men and resources during the 1870s as the U.S. Army battled the Apaches. The Mogollon Rim is a 200-mile escarpment making the southern terminus of the Colorado Plateau in Arizona. In some places, it is a 2,000-foot sheer drop-off. Most of the rim was over 8,000 feet above sea level, with tremendous scenic outlooks to the valleys below, with ponderosa pines as far as the eye could see. I ate many a meal sitting on the edge, just in awe of the beauty of this land. The evening before, I had just been on the trail for a few miles. It was the last few fleeting moments of dusk before being pitch black. I was looking for a decent place to camp for the night. I came around a bend in the road and saw a giant campfire. It was next to the trail, so I wanted to alert the campers of my presence as I was walking by, not wanting to spook them. Too late. I did anyway. A couple of the Smiths had already seen my silhouette before I shouted, "Hello, in camp!" Evidently, my appearance was a shock in that I looked like I had no head. Because of the size of my backpack, according to the Smiths, I appeared like the headless horseman amongst the pine trees in the fading light of dusk and the roaring campfire's soft glow. Bob and Wendy were very much relieved when they heard a friendly voice emanate from this approaching figure bereft ahead. I was invited into camp and offered a double-stuffed Oreo s'more. For me, this was a new twist on the campfire confectionery. It had slipped my mind that it was Halloween, as Bob and Wendy wished me well on this All Hallows Eve. We visited and told stories, and they wouldn't hear of me not staying the night and pitching my tent near their fire. The next day after breakfast, they showed me some landmarks, since they regularly came here to camp, including a Native American trail marker tree, most likely left by the Apaches, who lived in this area years ago. Trail marker trees are bent into shape as saplings and manipulated to the desired shape as they grow. Usually the bent end or the nose points to a direction of essential resources or other significant geographies. And of course, you must go to the Rim Lookout. We then parted ways, and I thanked them for my tricks or treats. A couple of days later down the path, I realized I needed a good bath, or people might mistake me for the Mogollon Monster. I had read about the Mogollon Monster in my research of this area, a supposed Bigfoot-type creature known to have a heaping case of body odor. I spied on my map that there was a nearby lake a couple of miles off the rim, so I decided that a swim and/or bath was in order, and detoured off the trail. Once there, I realized that the water temperature was 50 degrees. Man, this is stinking cold. I built a fire on the shore to warm up and dry off with as soon as I got out. I hadn't seen anyone besides the Smiths and a father and son hunting duo in 2 days, and it was near lunchtime. I scanned the shore and surrounding forest in every direction. I had the whole place to myself, and not wanting to have wet clothes afterward, I thought a dip in my birthday suit wouldn't hurt anyone. So into the water I went, sans clothes, with a soap in hand and a fedora on my head. The water was frigid. Then I heard a low rumble. I quickly looked around as I sprinted back to shore through the cold water. But I saw nothing except a plane way off in the distance. Whew, I thought I had an audience. Back into the water I went. Did I mention it was cold? I quickly bathed, and just as I was finishing, I heard another sound. Just up the hill, the father-son hunters had pulled up to the lake. I lowered my fedora like a fig leaf and just waved with the soap in my other hand. They laughed and waved back and then drove on. I quickly got to shore and dried off. The fire had been a good call. Later that day, the father-son hunting team passed me on the road and stopped to say hi. They had come to hunt elk for a few days. They gave me an ice-cold Coca-Cola, and it hit the spot. I would not encounter anyone else on Rim Road 300 until I got back into civilization. While out in the wilderness, I had my first encounter with elk. I had heard them the first night before actually seeing any of them. The second night on the rim, I had heard something walking through the grass in the clearing next to my camp. I threw a light upon this unsuspecting, nocturnal traveler and gave this elk cow the fright of her life, for she was off in a heartbeat. All you could hear was the crashing sound of her massive hooves in full retreat. The next day, I saw a herd of about 30 elk, and then another herd later on. They are so impressive to see in the wild. It can be unnerving if you've never heard elk vocalizations. The bulls and the cows have different calls. The only thing I can compare their bugles to would be that of humpback whale song, but on land, and a whole lot creepier. Just imagine that echoing through the night in the middle of the wilderness. The first night I heard them, I had an idea what the noise was, probably because of a Marty Stauffer Wild America rerun as a kid. I was just outside Forest Lakes, Arizona, already off the rim, though still very much in the forest and in prime elk country. I found a little restaurant on Highway 260 just before sunset, and I had the most excellent cheeseburger. I can't decide if I still remember that burger so well because it was just that good, or because it stands out compared to several days of hiking and eating pack food in MREs. Probably both. It was a delicious burger. On a side note, I recently listened to another podcast about why you crave burgers after a long hike. Maren Larson from Outside Magazine, the Outside Podcast. Why outdoor adventures make you crave a giant, juicy burger. I then hiked back into the woods and found a place to camp for the night. I warmed myself with a campfire and read for a while until I was too tired to stay awake. I had let my fire die out, crawled into my tent, and tucked myself into my winter sleeping bag. I was thrilled to have it in my gear because it was now in the upper 30s. It had been waiting in my supply cache in Sedona, Arizona. After a hard day's worth of travel and a very full belly, I was in a deep slumber. Unbeknownst to me, a bull elk had found himself in my camp. At this moment, my would-be assailant bugled like a banshee. An elk call, especially from a bull, is deafening at this range. As I mentioned before, I was sleeping deeply. His call to the wild like to have made me jump out of my skin. After the fog of war set in, I wanted to take cover and find the enemy's position. Once I came to my senses, I called out to my adversary in a half yell, half grunt, "Hyah!" This had the desired effect of startling him to move on. Yet, instead of going away, the sound of his hooves crashing to the ground as he ran was coming toward me. I fumbled with my sleeping bag zipper, trying to get out of my bag in a hurry. Just when I thought he would crash into my tent, he turned, jumped over a downed tree, and went off in another direction. This was a relief, for I was already having flashbacks to when I was run over in my sleep by a Marine Corps 5-ton. The week before, October 22nd, was the first anniversary that a Marine Corps 5-ton had run over both my legs. I met Ron Hancock, a 6th grade teacher at a local restaurant in Heber, Arizona. He was an avid backpacker as well. This might have been one of the reasons he invited me home to meet his wife and children. Ron was also a competitive elk caller. I then learned the difference between the bull and cow elk calls, thus confirming what I thought I had encountered the night before. Then I was off to Show Low, Arizona. I made camp at Fool's Hollow Lake, a couple of miles just outside of town. That night I decided to walk into town for someone else's cooking. After finally finding an ATM, I ate at the local Dairy Queen. I passed by the high school on the way back to camp. It was a Friday night, so naturally a football game was in progress. I guess what lured me in first was the sound of the marching band, and then the stadium lights glow. So I meandered over to catch a quarter or two of the game. The sound of the crowd, the smell of the cut grass, the cool fall night air, and the players in action were all nostalgic and reminded me of my childhood. This year, the Show Low Cougars would go on to win their first 3A state championship. After watching the game for a while, it was time to return to camp. I hiked to Springerville, Arizona next, the last town before New Mexico. Day 50. Date November 8th, 1999. Sunrise 6:39 a.m. Sunset 5:13 p.m. Moon phase. New moon. Elevation 7,778 feet. Location Pie Town, New Mexico. This part of New Mexico was just as beautiful as Arizona, though between the mountains there were wide, open ranges, great cattle country, and I saw lots of cows. In this region of northeastern Arizona and western New Mexico, I had seen bison, elk, mule deer, coyotes, porcupine, a wolf, various squirrels, rabbits, red-tailed hawks, blue herons, and other assorted birds, pronghorn antelope, and lots of cattle and horses. The morning I was crossing the Arizona-New Mexico state line, I witnessed a cattle drive going right down Highway 60. Cowboys on horses and all, which had traffic backed up in each direction. I had left water near mile marker 1 on Highway 60 in New Mexico, but I didn't need all of it. So, if you ever find yourself in need and you're out there, there's a gallon of water there. I was aiming for Quemado, New Mexico. Quemado means burned or burnt, and was the name given by the Spanish conquistadors. Legend has it that Geronimo burned the town down twice, but I could not find any corroborating evidence to support this. Quemado was also a supply cash drop. I had left a box of goods at the King Arthur's Court, a motel with a suit of armor outside. When I drove through in early September, I'd had a burger and a pleasant visit with a couple of folks. They had mentioned that New Mexico was the last frontier. I noticed at the hardware store, the cafe, well, just about everywhere in town, everyone brandished a gun. I thought, Man, I really am in the Old West out here. I had been offered many rides and turned down most of these rides, except in the rare instances of being really close to a laundromat or grocery store just before closing time. Or, that one time near the Anzo Borrego Desert State Park where I kind of ran out of water on the Pacific Crest Trail. Listen to episode 3, Dances with Blisters, for more details. However, this one time that I was offered a ride, I didn't need or want one, but I felt like I should because of the insistence of the two sisters who were offering. Gail and Rose, sisters from Arkansas, who now live in Omega, just the other side of Quemado, had passed me that morning during the cattle drive and waved. They had been headed to Springerville, Arizona, the nearest town with a supermarket 50 miles away. I remembered their little red Ford Ranger when it passed me. That afternoon, I was nearing the town of Quemado. Gail and Rose stopped and offered a ride on their way back from Springerville. I refused twice, but they seemed genuinely concerned about my well-being. And my gut said, okay, maybe I should hear them out and see what's going on. They explained that in addition to a manhunt for 2 separate escaped convicts on foot, armed and dangerous, at which point I reminded them I was on foot, but they were confident that I was okay because of the amount and quality of the gear on my back. They said I looked like a man of determination. I was to find out that there was 9 unsolved murders in the surrounding area in recent years. There had been a shootout and homicide the week or 2 prior to me arriving, and they thought today's court proceedings would lead to a riot that night, which they were confident was not a safe place for a stranger traveling on foot. The shootout. As it was relayed to me, the son of the owner of the King Arthur's Court, oh wait, that's where my supplies are at, had been a very colorful gentleman. I'll refer to him as Arthur. He supplied illegal drugs to half the town and used his father's business as a front. Half of the town partied with him, and so he was well liked by them. The other half of the town found him morally bankrupt and despicable. Not too long before I arrived, he had been at his girlfriend's home on a ranch just outside of town. They had argued, and the woman's father intervened and told the gentleman he would need to leave. Tempers flared, and Arthur refused to leave. The old man tells him, I will shoot you if you don't leave. Arthur does it, and the old man does. He grabbed a .22 rifle by the door and shot Arthur in the leg. Arthur limps back to his truck, returns with a .357 pistol, and kills the old man. While Arthur is limping back to his truck a second time, the girlfriend shoots him in the back with a .38 pistol. He's able to climb into his truck and drive himself to the nearest hospital in Springerville, Arizona, 50 miles away. Arthur survived, and his arraignment day was the day I was to arrive in Quemado. The court down in Reserve, New Mexico, the Catron County seat, had set his bond too high, so he stayed in jail. That night, his supporters returned, liquored up, and a riot ensued. Thankfully, I was well out of town for this, and very much glad. The sisters had helped me out of the frying pan, but we weren't out of the fire just yet. You see, Gail and Rose had one more potential obstacle before getting home to their subdivision near Omega, New Mexico. They further explained through the open rear window of the truck on the drive home. There was this feisty 84-year-old woman named Myrtle. Her father had homesteaded this part of New Mexico during World War I, and she had lived there most of her life on this 20,000-acre ranch. There had been a dispute about a road the county had put across the property for years. Tensions had only increased to the point that Myrtle would supposedly shoot at the county workmen grading the road and send unsigned death threats or henchman's notices to the county judge and attorney. She also put a fence right down the very center of the road to prevent residents of the subdivision on the other end from accessing the road. Finally, The county judge locked her up in jail until she had removed the fence. Despite having removed the fence, she put up another right next to the road, and at random times pulled her truck sideways on the road to block traffic. She then would stand down any would-be traveler along the road with a .44 until they decided to get shot or turn around. Sometimes she would feign death upon her steering wheel to lure people to her truck before pulling her hand cannon upon them. Everyone was scared of Myrtle, except of course her friends, and charges always mysteriously dropped when brought against her for harassing people on the road. At different times, Gail and Rose had both been on the receiving end of Myrtle's threats while just trying to get home. Thankfully, no sign of Myrtle as we drove out to the sister subdivision. Technically, this is a subdivision, and that land was subdivided and sold to people to build their homes. But electricity had not yet been run to this subdivision, so unless you had the means to be off-grid, you were in the dark. Gail said it would be at least another year before the electric company would run power out to their neighborhood. I was used to no electricity while camping, so this was no problem. Their wolf dog slept outside my tent to keep me company that night. The following day after breakfast, I thanked the sisters for their hospitality and thinking of my well-being with that, whole riot business. Then they ran me the 10 miles back down the county road to Omega, and I made my way east. Thankfully, no Myrtle sightings. Well, I made tracks from there and soon crossed the Continental Divide. Just before doing so, I met two fellow backpackers in Pie Town, New Mexico. Their trail names were Julian and Bush. We met at this place called Pioneer, famous for their pies. A little slice of heaven on the Great Divide. These two fellow Texans left the Canadian-U.S. border 5 months and 1 day before I met them here in Pie Town. They were hiking the Continental Divide Trail. They only had 200 or 300 more miles before the trail ends at the Mexican border. Their 5 months made my 6 weeks look pretty small, though this encouraged me greatly. We must have talked for half an hour before our separate hiking parties had to be on their way. We traded secrets of the trade and swapped war stories. They said, compared to them, I still looked like an upstanding citizen. We all laughed at this, and I snapped their picture, and we went on our separate ways. Next time on the Long Journey Podcast. On July 16th, 1945, at 05:29 and 45 seconds, the first atomic bomb was detonated. It was said by the people living in the area that it was the day the sun came up twice. The blast was felt at least 160 miles away, and the shockwave broke windows at a distance of 120 miles. Though the explanation given to the public at the time was that a munitions dump had exploded, the public suspected that something was aloof. It wasn't until after the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, Japan, on August 6th, did the public find out what had happened in New Mexico. The world had now entered the nuclear age. You can find more details about the Long Journey Podcast at JourneyLong.com. And be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on your platform of choice. Thank you, and may you journey long.